The lone silhouette of a rider against the orange-streaked horizon made Lucy Anderson pause at the edge of the creek, her washboard forgotten in her hands. She'd been in Vulture City, Arizona territory for only 2 weeks, and already she'd learned that strangers meant trouble more often than not. It was 1883, and the West was changing, but not fast enough for a woman alone. Lucy squeezed excess water from the shirt she'd been washing and set it in her basket. The figure was still a fair distance away, moving at a steady pace down the dusty trail that led toward town. She gathered her things quickly, unwilling to be caught vulnerable and alone as daylight faded. By the time Lucy reached the boarding house where she'd taken a small room, the last glow of sunset was disappearing. Mrs. Whittaker, the stern-faced widow who owned the establishment, greeted her with a raised eyebrow. "Cutting it close, Miss Anderson. Not safe for a lady after dark." "I know, Mrs. Whittaker. I saw a rider coming in and thought it best to hurry back." The older woman nodded approvingly. "Good sense. There's stew if you're hungry." Lucy ate quickly, her mind drifting to the letter in her pocket, a response from the schoolhouse committee. She'd applied for the teaching position immediately upon arriving in town, hoping to put her education to use. Tomorrow she'd find out if Vulture City would have its first proper schoolteacher. Sleep came fitfully that night. Lucy tossed in her narrow bed, thoughts racing between hope for the position and memories of what she'd left behind in Boston: her father's gambling debts, her mother's grave, and the persistent banker who'd offered marriage as an alternative to eviction. The West had seemed like her only escape. Morning brought clarity and purpose. Lucy dressed in her best skirt and blouse, pinned her chestnut hair neatly, and made her way to the town hall. Mayor Perkins, a rotund man with a walrus mustache, smiled broadly when she entered. "Miss Anderson, just the lady we wanted to see." 3 other men sat around a scarred wooden table, the town council, she presumed. One of them, a thin man with spectacles, frowned openly at her. "I still say it's a waste of the town's money," he muttered. Mayor Perkins waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, Jennings. Education is the future." He turned to Lucy. "The position is yours if you'll have it, Miss Anderson. $25 a month plus room and board once the schoolhouse is completed." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When might I start?" "The building needs some work yet. 2 weeks, perhaps." "In the meantime, you're welcome to begin organizing supplies. We've ordered books from back east." As Lucy left the town hall, her step lighter than it had been in months, she nearly collided with a tall figure exiting the general store. "Beg pardon, madam," came a deep voice, as strong hands steadied her shoulders. Lucy looked up into the most intense pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a man with a day's growth of beard, wearing a dust-covered duster and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. His face was weathered, but he couldn't have been more than 30. "No harm done," she managed, stepping back. The man tipped his hat, revealing a shock of dark blonde hair. "Samuel Miller," he said by way of introduction. "Just rode in yesterday." So this was the rider she'd seen. Up close, he cut an imposing figure, broad-shouldered and tall, with a gun belt worn low on his hips and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. "Lucy Anderson," she replied, offering a polite nod. "New schoolteacher." Something flickered in his eyes. "Schoolteacher, that's good." Town could use some civilization. Before she could respond, the general store owner called out to him. "Miller, your supplies are ready." Samuel Miller tipped his hat once more. "Madam." Then he was gone, leaving Lucy with an odd flutter in her stomach that she promptly attributed to hunger. Over the next 2 weeks, Lucy threw herself into preparing for her new position. The schoolhouse, a simple one-room building at the edge of town, needed cleaning and organizing. She worked from morning until evening, barely noticing the comings and goings of the townsfolk. She saw Samuel Miller occasionally at the general store, riding through town or talking with the blacksmith. He'd nod in her direction but never approached. Lucy heard whispers about him. A rancher looking to buy land nearby, a skilled horseman, possibly a former soldier. The female patrons of the boarding house seemed particularly interested in his unmarried status. One evening, as Lucy was returning from the schoolhouse, she passed the saloon just as a commotion erupted inside. Shouts and the sound of breaking glass sent her scurrying to the opposite boardwalk. Moments later, two men burst through the batwing doors, locked in combat. One was Samuel Miller. The other, a burly man with a red beard, had a knife in his hand. "You cheating bastard," the red-bearded man bellowed. Samuel's voice was cold. "Put it away, Thornton, I don't cheat." Lucy stood frozen as the men circled each other. Samuel moved with a predator's grace, his eyes never leaving his opponent. When Thornton lunged, Samuel sidestepped and delivered a precise blow to the man's wrist. The knife clattered to the dirt. What happened next was so fast Lucy barely registered it. Thornton charged, Samuel pivoted, and suddenly the larger man was face down in the street with Samuel's knee in his back. The sheriff arrived moments later, dispersing the small crowd that had gathered. Lucy realized she'd been holding her breath only when Samuel glanced up and caught her eye. His expression was unreadable, but he gave her a small nod before helping the sheriff haul Thornton to his feet. That night, unable to sleep, Lucy stepped onto the boarding house porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She was surprised to see a figure seated on the bench at the far end. Samuel Miller, smoking a cigarette. He stood when he noticed her. "Evening, Miss Anderson, Mr. Miller." She hesitated, then added, "I saw what happened earlier," he shrugged. "Some men can't lose gracefully. Were you really cheating?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "No, madam, just lucky." He studied her for a moment. "Couldn't sleep." "Too much on my mind. The school opens in 3 days. Nervous?" Lucy considered the question. "Yes, but excited too. These children deserve an education." Samuel's smile deepened, creating lines at the corners of his eyes. "Noble cause. And you, Mr. Miller?" "What brings you to our small corner of Arizona?" The smile faded slightly. "Looking for a fresh start. Heard there was good grazing land outside town." He crushed his cigarette beneath his boot. "The war left a lot of men drifting. You fought," he nodded once. "Union cavalry." "Seems a lifetime ago now." The schoolhouse opening was a success. 12 children, ranging from 6 to 15 years old, filed into the freshly painted room, eyeing their new teacher with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Lucy won them over quickly with stories and the promise of a proper education. As the weeks passed, Lucy settled into a routine. Mornings and afternoons were spent teaching, evenings preparing lessons and grading the sparse homework she assigned. She took her meals at the boarding house and occasionally visited the general store for supplies. She didn't see Samuel Miller as often. Word around town was that he'd purchased the old Jacobson place 3 miles outside of town and was busy making it habitable. Occasionally, she'd spot him riding through town, sometimes leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. Autumn arrived, bringing cooler nights and glorious sunsets. Lucy found herself lingering outdoors in the evenings, savoring the respite from the summer heat. It was during one such evening, nearly 2 months after her arrival in Vulture City, that her path crossed with Samuel Miller's once more. A sudden thunderstorm had caught Lucy on her way back from visiting a student's family. She'd hurried along the muddy road, but the rain had soaked her to the skin by the time she reached town. As she passed the livery stable, a voice called out, "Miss Anderson, in here." Samuel Miller stood in the doorway, beckoning her inside. Lucy didn't hesitate. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and lightning split the sky above. The stable was warm and smelled of hay and horses. Samuel guided her to a small room off the main area, the stable hand's quarters, she guessed, though it was currently unoccupied. "Sit by the fire," he said, gesturing to a small stove in the corner. "I was just about to make coffee." Lucy removed her sodden shawl, acutely aware of how her wet dress clung to her figure. Samuel politely averted his eyes, busying himself with the coffee pot. "Thank you," she said, moving closer to the warmth. I didn't expect the storm to hit so quickly. Desert weather, he replied with a shrug, changes its mind faster than a woman in a dress shop. Lucy raised an eyebrow. You seem quite familiar with women's shopping habits, Mr. Miller. A genuine laugh escaped him, transforming his usually serious features. I had 3 sisters, Miss Anderson. I know more about ribbons and lace than any man should. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what Lucy needed. As the storm raged outside, they talked simple conversation at first, about the town and the school. Samuel asked intelligent questions about her teaching methods, and Lucy found herself explaining her belief in education as a path to opportunity. My father was a professor, she explained. He believed knowledge was the great equalizer. Something shadowed Samuel's expression. And yet the world remains decidedly unequal. That doesn't mean we stop trying to improve it, Lucy countered. The storm showed no signs of abating. As evening deepened, Samuel lit a lantern and added wood to the stove. In the flickering light, Lucy noticed a long, jagged scar along his forearm when he rolled up his sleeve to stoke the fire. "Were you injured?" she asked before she could stop herself. Samuel glanced at his arm, then pulled his sleeve down. "Just an old wound. From the war," he hesitated. "After, had some trouble with cattle rustlers in Kansas." Lucy wanted to ask more but sensed his reluctance. Instead, she changed the subject. "How are the repairs on your ranch coming along?" The tension in his shoulders eased. "Slowly. The previous owner let it go to ruin. I've repaired the roof and most of the fencing, but there's still plenty to do before winter." "You're doing all the work yourself," he nodded. "Hired help is scarce and my funds aren't unlimited." He smiled wryly. "I've always been good with my hands." The rain finally slackened around 9 o'clock. Samuel insisted on escorting Lucy back to the boarding house, holding a lantern to light their way through the muddy streets. "Thank you for the coffee and conversation," Lucy said when they reached her door. "It was unexpectedly pleasant." Samuel's eyes crinkled. "High praise indeed, Miss Anderson." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps you'd consider a Sunday drive to see the ranch when the weather improves, of course." "I could use a schoolteacher's opinion on my humble abode." Lucy felt her cheeks warm. "I'd like that, Mr. Miller." His smile deepened. "Samuel, please, if we're to be friends." "Lucy, then." He tipped his hat. "Good night, Lucy." Sunday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures perfect for a drive in the country. Samuel appeared promptly at noon with a wagon, the horses groomed and harnessed with care. Lucy had dressed in her best day dress, a blue calico that matched her eyes, according to Mrs. Whittaker. "You look lovely," Samuel said simply when she emerged from the boarding house. He helped her into the wagon with a strong, sure grip, and Lucy found herself studying his profile as they set off. In the daylight, without the shadow of his hat, she could see the fine lines around his eyes and a small scar near his temple that she hadn't noticed before. The road out of town wound through scrubby desert terrain that gradually gave way to grassland. Samuel pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area. He was knowledgeable about the land in a way that suggested he'd done his research before purchasing property. "There it is," he said eventually, gesturing ahead. "The Miller Ranch." Lucy saw a modest single-story house with a new-looking porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings, all set against the backdrop of a small mesa. A creek ran along one edge of the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees. It wasn't grand, but it had a certain sturdy charm. "It's wonderful," she said honestly. Samuel's pleased expression told her the compliment meant something to him. "It needs work, but it's solid. The previous owner died without heirs and the bank was eager to sell." He gave her a tour of the barn first, where several horses nickered in greeting, then the corral, chicken coop, and smokehouse. The house itself was sparsely furnished but clean, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. "I'm still acquiring furniture," he explained, somewhat apologetically, "but the roof doesn't leak anymore and the windows all have glass." "It's a fine start," Lucy assured him. "A home takes time to build." They ate lunch on the porch, fresh bread, cheese, and apples that Samuel had packed. The conversation flowed easily between them, touching on books they'd read, places they'd seen, and their hopes for the future. As the afternoon waned, Samuel suggested a walk along the creek. The water burbled pleasantly over smooth stones and birds darted among the trees overhead. Lucy found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since arriving in Arizona. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured as they paused to watch a heron fishing in the shallows. Samuel glanced at her. "You may ask. I might not answer. What really brought you to Vulture City?" "It seems an unlikely place for a man with your capabilities." He was quiet for so long that Lucy thought he might not respond. Finally, he sighed. "After the war, I drifted, worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the army, even tried my hand at bounty hunting for a spell." He looked out across the land. "None of it felt right. I was just existing, not living. And now I want roots, something of my own that can't be taken away." He met her eyes. "What about you, Lucy Anderson? What brings a Boston-educated lady to teach in a dusty Arizona town?" It was Lucy's turn to hesitate. "Necessity initially. My father died leaving substantial debts. There were limited options for a woman in my position." She didn't mention the persistent banker. "But now that I'm here, I find I enjoy the challenge. These children are hungry for knowledge." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Running from something is rarely a good reason to do anything, but finding purpose where you land, that's a different matter entirely." The ride back to town was quieter, both lost in their thoughts. When they reached the boarding house, Samuel helped Lucy down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "Thank you for showing me your home," she replied, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. For a heartbeat, Lucy thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back and tipped his hat. "Good evening, Miss Anderson." October brought cooler weather and the town's annual harvest festival. Lucy's students performed a recitation for the occasion, making her burst with pride as parents and townsfolk applauded their efforts. Samuel attended, standing at the back of the crowd, his eyes finding hers across the gathering. They had seen each other frequently in the weeks since their Sunday drive chance encounters in town, brief conversations after church, and once, a shared meal at the hotel restaurant when they both happened to be there at the same time. Each interaction left Lucy more certain of her growing feelings, though neither had spoken of them aloud. The festival continued into the evening with music and dancing in the town square. Lucy watched from the sidelines, tapping her foot to the lively fiddle music. She didn't notice Samuel approach until he was beside her. "Would you care to dance, Miss Anderson?" His formal tone made her smile. "I would indeed, Mr. Miller." His hand at her waist was warm and steady as he guided her into the circle of dancers. Samuel moved with surprising grace for such a tall man, leading her through the steps of the country dance with confidence. "You dance well for a rancher," she observed. "My mother insisted all her children learn, said it was a civilized accomplishment." His eyes twinkled. "Though I doubt she envisioned me putting it to use in an Arizona town square." When the music slowed to a waltz, Samuel drew her closer. Lucy was acutely aware of his strength, the scent of soap and leather that clung to him, and the way his eyes never left her face. "People are watching," she murmured. "Let them. I'm not ashamed to be seen dancing with the prettiest woman in town." The compliment warmed her cheeks. "Careful, Mr. Miller, a lady might think you're courting her with talk like that." Something serious flickered in his eyes. "Would that be so terrible?" Before Lucy could respond, a commotion erupted near the saloon. Raised voices gave way to the unmistakable sound of gunshots. The music stopped abruptly, and Samuel instinctively pulled Lucy behind him as people scattered. "Stay here," he ordered, then strode toward the disturbance. Lucy watched in alarm as he disappeared into the crowd. More gunshots rang out, followed by shouting. Minutes stretched like hours as she waited, heart pounding. When Samuel finally reappeared, his expression was grim. "Bank robbers," he explained tersely. "3 men, they shot the teller." He took her elbow, guiding her away from the square. "Sheriffs formed a posse. They're heading out now to track them." "Are you joining them?" Lucy asked, already knowing the answer. Samuel's jaw tightened. "I have to. I know this terrain better than most." He hesitated, then added, "I'll see you safely home first." They walked in silence to the boarding house. At the door, Samuel turned to face her. "I'll likely be gone a few days, don't worry." Lucy reached out impulsively, touching his arm. "Be careful." "Please." Something softened in his face. He caught her hand, pressed it briefly to his lips. "I will." Then he was gone, striding toward the gathering posse at the edge of town. Lucy watched until his figure disappeared into the darkness, an inexplicable fear clutching at her heart. 5 days passed with no word from the posse. Lucy threw herself into her teaching, but her thoughts constantly strayed to Samuel. On the 6th day, as she was dismissing her students, she heard hoofbeats on the road outside. The posse had returned. She hurried to the door, scanning the weary men for Samuel's familiar figure. When she spotted him at the rear of the group, relief washed over her so strongly that her knees nearly buckled. He saw her too. After a brief word with the sheriff, he broke away from the group and rode toward the schoolhouse. Lucy met him at the hitching post, noting the exhaustion etched on his face and the dried blood on his sleeve. "You're hurt," she said by way of greeting. Samuel dismounted stiffly. "It's nothing." "Bullet grazed me." He looked down at her, his eyes softening. "Were you worried, Miss Anderson?" "Terribly," she admitted. "Did you catch them?" His expression darkened. "2 of them. The 3rd won't be bothering anyone again." He glanced at the schoolhouse. "Are you finished for the day?" Lucy nodded. "Just dismiss the children. Would you walk with me? I could use the company of someone who isn't tracking outlaws or discussing bullet wounds." They walked slowly through town and beyond, following a trail that led to a small rise overlooking Vulture City. The sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson as they sat on a flat boulder. "It's beautiful," Lucy murmured. Samuel made a sound of agreement, though his eyes were on her rather than the view. "Lucy," he said after a moment, "I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made her turn to face him fully. "What is it?" "When we were tracking those men, there was a moment," he paused, seeming to struggle for words. "A bullet came too close, made me think about what I'd regret if it had found its mark." Lucy's breath caught. "And what would you regret?" "Not telling you how I feel." He met her eyes steadily. "I care for you, Lucy. More than I expected to care for anyone again, but before you respond, there are things you should know about me, about my past." "Tell me," she said simply. Samuel took a deep breath. "After the war I was lost, angry. I did things I'm not proud of." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the scar she'd noticed before. "This wasn't from cattle rustlers, it was from a knife fight in a Kansas saloon. I killed the man who gave it to me." Lucy remained silent, waiting. "I was a bounty hunter for 3 years. Tracked men who deserved catching, but I took no joy in it. Just needed something to do with the skills the war had given me." His voice roughened. "I've killed men, Lucy, in battle and after. It's not something I can forget, even if the law considers it justified." "Why are you telling me this now?" He looked away. "Because if there's to be anything between us, you deserve the truth. I'm not the simple rancher I've pretended to be." Lucy considered his words carefully. "Have you lied to me about anything else?" "No. Everything else I've told you is true, especially how I feel about you." She reached out, gently turning his face back toward hers. "Samuel, we all have pasts. What matters to me is the man you are now, the man who helps his neighbors, who treats children with kindness, who dances well because his mother taught him." Relief flooded his features. "You're not repulsed by your honesty?" "No, quite the opposite," she smiled softly. "I appreciate knowing who I'm falling in love with." The words hung between them, unexpected yet undeniable. Samuel's eyes widened, then darkened with emotion. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Lucy responded, her hands finding their way to his shoulders. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. "I love you, Lucy Anderson," Samuel whispered against her hair. "I think I have since you nearly ran me over outside the general store," Lucy laughed softly. "As I recall, you were the one not watching where you were going." She pulled back to look at him. "But I love you too." They returned to town hand in hand as twilight settled over the desert. At the boarding house, Mrs. Whittaker raised a knowing eyebrow but said nothing as Samuel respectfully bid Lucy good night with a chaste kiss to her hand. The following weeks were the happiest of Lucy's life. Samuel courted her properly, with flowers and Sunday drives and dinners at the hotel under Mrs. Whittaker's watchful eye. The town buzzed with gossip about the schoolteacher and the rancher, but Lucy paid it no mind. As winter approached, Samuel worked tirelessly on his ranch, preparing for the cold months ahead. Lucy visited when she could, bringing picnic lunches and helping with the vegetable garden she'd convinced him to plant. Together, they made the bare house into something that felt increasingly like a home. One evening in late November, Samuel invited Lucy to the ranch for supper. He'd prepared a simple meal, beef stew and fresh bread, but had set the table with care. A fire blazed in the hearth, warding off the night's chill. After they'd eaten, they sat before the fire, Lucy in the rocking chair Samuel had crafted for her, he on the floor at her feet. The firelight cast a warm glow, illuminating his profile as he gazed into the flames. "What are you thinking about?" Lucy asked, running her fingers through his hair. "The future," he replied. "Our future if you'll have me." Lucy's heart skipped. "Samuel," he turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "I love you, Lucy. I want to build a life with you here if that suits you, or elsewhere if it doesn't. I just know I don't want to be without you." "Are you proposing, Mr. Miller?" Lucy asked, her voice unsteady. "Inelegantly, perhaps," he smiled ruefully. "I'm not a polished man, Lucy, but everything I have and everything I am is yours if you want it." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want it, I want you." Joy transformed his face. He pulled her gently from the chair into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. As they sat entwined before the fire, Lucy noticed again the network of scars on Samuel's exposed forearm, the knife wound he'd mentioned, but also older marks, some thin and white with age, others more pronounced. She traced one with her finger. "Will you tell me about these someday?" Samuel followed her gaze, then met her eyes with a gentle smile. "They're just stories I lived through," he said softly, "and now I have you to help write new ones." They were married on Christmas Day in the small church in Vulture City. Lucy wore a cream-colored dress ordered from Tucson, and Samuel a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortably respectable. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, followed by a celebration at the hotel that lasted well into the evening. As Samuel drove his bride home to their ranch that night, snowflakes began to fall, a rare occurrence in that part of Arizona. Lucy laughed with delight, catching them on her gloved hands. "A good omen," Samuel said, smiling at her joy. "New beginnings." The house welcomed them, warm and glowing with lamplight. Samuel had hired a neighbor's wife to prepare it for their return, and a fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. With gentle hands, Samuel removed Lucy's cloak, then turned her to face him. "Welcome home, Mrs. Miller." The name, so new and yet so right, made Lucy smile. "It sounds wonderful when you say it." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Lucy traced the scars on her husband's body, each one a chapter in the story that had brought him to her. Some were from battles, others from the harsh realities of life in the West. All of them had shaped the man she loved. "No more scars," she whispered against his chest. "At least not ones that come from pain." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "With you, I'm healing in ways I never thought possible." Spring came to Vulture City in a riot of desert blooms. The Miller Ranch prospered under Samuel's careful management, and Lucy continued teaching, riding to town each morning on the mare Samuel had trained especially for her. By summer, Lucy's slightly altered dresses and radiant glow announced what they had begun to tell friends: a child would join their family by winter. Samuel's joy was tempered only by his protective concern, which Lucy both appreciated and occasionally found stifling. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him one evening as he insisted on carrying a basket she could easily manage. His smile was sheepish. "Can you blame a man for wanting to care for his wife and child?" Lucy's heart melted at the tenderness in his voice. "No, and I love you for it." Their son, William Thomas Miller, was born on a cold January night with the help of the town doctor and Mrs. Whittaker, who had become a dear friend. Samuel paced anxiously outside the bedroom door until the baby's first cry sent him rushing in, his face a mixture of fear and wonder. "We have a son," Lucy said tiredly, holding out the swaddled infant. Samuel took the tiny bundle with hands that trembled slightly. "He's perfect," he whispered, awe evident in his voice, "just like his mother." As spring returned once more, Lucy often found herself watching her husband and son together, Samuel pointing out birds to the baby as they sat on the porch, or singing softly as he rocked him to sleep. In those moments, she thought of the scars that had once defined him, the past he'd been running from when he arrived in Vulture City. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked one evening, finding her standing in the doorway of their home watching the sunset. Lucy smiled, leaning back against his chest as his arms encircled her. "About stories, the ones that brought us together and the ones we're creating now." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I like our story, Mrs. Miller, so do I." She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "Very much." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Lucy Anderson Miller knew with absolute certainty that some scars weren't marks of pain, but road maps leading exactly where you needed to go. And sometimes, the most beautiful stories came from the most unexpected beginnings.